Okay, so this is Jason with Christianity and Perennialism. I have the great privilege of speaking with Charles Upton. Probably doesn't need much of an introduction for anyone who's been around perennialism for a bit. He's been writing for about more than 20 years, over 20 books on the subject of perennialism. And in particular, the reason why I wanted to speak with Charles was because he seems to me to be the only writer out there who is really wedding together the topics of perennialism and metaphysics on the one hand, and eschatology and real world current events on the other, which is bringing us back to Rene Guénon, that was kind of his final thesis when he published Reign of Quantity. Was kind of he was letting the world know that it's becoming impossible to ignore metaphysics now, that it's coming to its final fruition now. You're gonna see it coming true right before your eyes. You're gonna see the end of the Kali Yuga right before your eyes. And I, in particular, I have your books, System of Antichrist and Legends of the End was the first of your books that I bought, and it's actually how I learned about you. Before I even knew you were involved with perennialism, I thought this was just a comparative eschatological book, and then I later got Vectors of the Counter Initiation and so on. But I feel like I reached out to you because current events are now at a point where, amazingly, perennialism is now becoming almost a mainstream topic with King Charles.
Yeah, with King Charles, and you probably know more than I do about the interest in perennialism among the young, because I'm placed in such a way. I'm not associated with a university, and I have a few friends in my Sufi world, and I answer emails that come to me. But exactly, what perennialism looks like to younger generations is not very clear to me. Although the significance of Prince, now King Charles, as being a perennialist is pretty clear. I've been sort of tracking that for a while.
So for my own part, I came through a kind of I imagine to be a kind of typical pipeline. I began as a left liberal, as many of us do. And then I went to the more libertarian side as I became sort of more worldly. And then I fell into this sort of alt-right nationalist thing for a bit, as I was still trying to feel my way around.
I never quite got to that, but I'm certainly aware of it. And, and it's an interesting piece of the puzzle. So.
And then fortuitously, my first exposure to metaphysics was actually through the founder of the Hare Krishnas, of all people, was Srila Prabhupada. I never became a Hare Krishna in earnest, but I came across his books and his videos, and I was just astounded at how he could bring together real life, real world events, and religion.
Yeah. And there's a long and venerable tradition of that. I mean, certainly Gandhi, and that whole development, brought things together. And religion has always had some relation to real world events, because if it didn't, it could not take place in this world. There would be no revelation if the eternal truths do not engage with time. Once they engage with time, they become realized, grounded, incarnate, if you want to use a Christian term, but also something is lost, or there are shadows and dangers which arise when that happens. But it's necessary, because otherwise, and if Islam, which is my religion, had not been profoundly engaged politically and militarily in making a place for itself in the world, it would never have gotten to me, So whenever, all large scale collective human efforts become involved with the darkness of the world, they shed blood, they violate mercy, they violate justice. Every single major human effort, whether it is religiously construed or not, does that. And this is what we have to live with, living in an imperfect world. But this doesn't mean we have to go along with the darker sides of efforts and with the parts of religion that seem to violate the principles of the founders. We're given darkness and light so that we may choose light. If there were no darkness, there would be no choice. So
certainly, and it was Srila Prabhupada who showed me that every choice you make every day has a consequence. We could imagine ourselves sort of like marionettes with millions of strings attached to us, but instead of being exclusively pulled, we're also pulling the strings. So every when you wake up in the morning, the first thing you do, whether the first word you say, et cetera, has an effect.
Yes.
And so when I came from the sort of his version of Hindu metaphysics, and then I came fortuitously into René Guénon, and my first book that I read from him was Reign of Quantity. So imagine my astonishment reading Reign of Quantity.
Yes,
for starters, and
that book continues to be more relevant all the time. I mean, just you look just parenthetically, this is a book, and for those who don't know it, about, you might say, the dialectic of apocalypse, the phases of things when we get to the limits of manifestation for a particular cycle of manifestation, and how these things work out in the final phases. And one of the chapters in that book, which seems to be sort of uninteresting to begin with, or peripherally says, well, one of the signs of the latter days, or the approach of the hour, as the Muslims call it, is the degeneration of coinage. Well, all right, so sure, I mean, all right, earlier phases of society make nicer coins, and then they get sort of rough, and wait a minute, look at the degeneration of coinage now. Cryptocurrency, for example. Certainly. That's a huge area, which could be a whole study in itself. Non-fungible tokens are actually exactly in line with what Guénon said when he said, well, the reign of quantity is going to end, and then there will be a reestablishment of hierarchy and verticality and quality, but it will be inverted quality, and that non-fungible tokens are the reign of inverted quality in terms of the degeneration of coinage. So just taking one little example of that, his principles are applicable in so many areas. It's just phenomenal.
Absolutely. And I really, the image that keeps coming back to me upon my first reading of it was, I don't know if you recall or if you ever seen the movie, The Never-Ending Story.
I don't think I did. Everybody said I should watch it, and I never did. So.
It is worth watching. But there's the sort of theme of it is there's a boy reading. He steals this sort of old storybook, this old fairy tale book from an old used bookstore, and he goes up to an attic and he's reading the book. And as he's reading it, all of the pieces of reality are falling into place, and he realizes how his imagination is creating reality to a large extent. And the sort of theme of the movie is he's reading this book with his mouth agape, just in complete awe, with candles around him. And I often have this image in my head when I first read Reign of Quantity. I was in complete awe at what I was reading. I was like, I finally found it. And after 40 years, I finally found what I was looking for. The Bible was fantastic. Reading, the Hindu scriptures and being exposed to their wisdom was fantastic. But this was the instruction manual that I finally found to reality.
Yeah. It is a phenomenal book, without doubt.
So I came with this complete just love for this book and this new world that I had found. And so of course I went online into social media, and I ventured, and I said, now I'm going to find my people right now. And finally, after all these years, I found it. I'm going to find my like-minded people. And I was so surprised to discover, and again, this is why I thought to reach out to you. I was so surprised to discover that there was really a kind of a lack of interest among those who read Guénon, or purport to read Guénon and read Schuon and read the perennialist writers. There was a lack of interest in applying these principles to what we see in front of us right now.
Yeah. And a lot of this came, I would say, from the influence of Frithjof Schuon. Certainly that was not true of Guénon, as you pointed out. Guénon had, I mean, you can't see he had a completely comprehensive view of socio-political realities, but he accepted them, he understood them. He saw many socio-political trends in light of metaphysics, and you know, he was able to criticize, for example, spiritualism in one of his first books as a subversive social force. He was able to look at the Theosophical Society. That's the other critique. He did basically two exposés, one of spiritualism, one of theosophy. And he says, well, and of course, the Theosophical Society is being used by the British Raj in an attempt, you know, to maintain their colonial hold on India. You know, that's may not have been the way it worked out, because Theosophists, you know, became important, at least in some people's minds, in Indian independence. But still, he was looking at that aspect of things. And Charles Legay Eaton, who at the end of his life just said, I'm not a perennialist, I'm not a traditionalist, I'm a Muslim. You know, that's but still, you know, his books, most of his books were written from a perennialist standpoint. And he was active in the main London mosque for quite a while. But he was in the diplomatic service. I mean, he knew what was going on that level, you know. And Rama P. Kumaraswamy, son of Ananda Kumaraswamy, who's considered to be, to some degree, co-founder of the traditionalist school. He wrote an article in a traditionalist anthology called In Quest of the Sacred of the Modern World in Light of Tradition, headed by Said Hossein Nasr. And he gave basically a view of what a social justice ideology would be from a traditional Catholic standpoint. And he was entirely a perennialist. And he looked at Catholicism in terms of perennialism, which not a lot of people have been able to do. And so he went back to the teachings of the popes, and he talked about the criticism of he criticized the International Monetary Fund for engineering the destitution of great masses of humanity. So he was able to see that. He said things like, communism is not the dialectical antithesis of capitalism, but rather its logical progression and ultimate achievement, which seems to be very true in terms of you know, neoliberalism in this country now. Definitely. So he knew what he was talking about. He went back to a Catholic social doctrine called distributism, which had also influenced Dorothy Day and the Catholic worker movement. And he you know, took a lot of the teachings from the popes about you know, social justice and the need not to follow the ways of the world. So, you know, most of his writing was not about that, but he was capable of looking at that. And in fact, that's an article that people should really try to find, particularly since King Charles is clearly associated, or has associated himself with the International Monetary Fund, you know, or actually the World Economic Forum, excuse me. But the International Monetary Fund is very much an allied organization. So we have to ask we just have to ask what's going on in connections like that. You know, we don't have to, you know, damn King Charles because how dare you be connected with these people? How dare you, you know, be involved in the world? He's going to be involved in the world. He is a world figure, and you know, that's his station in life. And so we don't just say, well, if he doesn't have the purity of the monk or the hermit in his cell, you know, then we must reject him. Of course not. But we need to ask, just sort of ask, well, what's really going on there? Take a look. Don't look away. That's what I say.
Absolutely. I noticed that a lot of the discussion among perennialists about King Charles centers around his subjective intentions. You have one side who says, well, he's a bad guy and he's out to hurt everybody and he's plotting to rule to
Yeah,
dominate the
yeah.
world. And then you have the other side saying he's a good guy, he means well, he's not. But both sides are kind of missing, that his subjective intentions are almost irrelevant. We have to look at what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, he's in a position where his subjective intentions can almost be guaranteed not to prevail. If perhaps if you are a hermit, in a hermitage somewhere, your subjective intentions will be paramount. But he's, the more involved with the world you are, the less free you are to live out or enforce your own, to follow your own lights. You have to follow the situation that you're involved in. So, that's the great weakness of the powerful. They cannot be free of the situations that they're trying to influence, and 9 times out of 10, they're more influenced by the world than capable of influencing the world. So,
are you familiar with his Terra Carta initiative?
I've just heard that term. I assume this has to do with a Bill of Rights for the natural world or something like this, or am I wrong?
Essentially, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And let me just read the first from his summary, the first clause from his summary, where he says, the aims of the Terra Carta will be met by, number 1, furthering and where possible exceeding the goals and targets outlined in the Paris Climate Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Convention to Combat Desertification, and the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. I mean, these are worrisome things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and if it were possible to reverse climate change through human action now, it would be a worthy goal and a necessary goal. But I mean, my feeling is, and maybe this is just because I don't want to give up my gas-fired furnace that keeps me warm in Kentucky winters, but the die is sort of cast when it comes to what's happening with the environment, and we have to watch out against saying that the natural world, the non-human natural world, has greater rights than humanity. Because if we do that, we're denying one of the central principles of traditionalism, as I understand it, is that the human being is the axial being, the central being for terrestrial existence. According to the Quran, the term for this is that the human being bears the amana, the trust. The Quran says, this is Allah speaking, we offered the trust to the heavens, the earth, and the hills, but they were afraid of it and they ran away from it. And man assumed. So man bears the trust at this point. And then the next phrase in the Quran, it says, lo, he hath proved a tyrant and a fool. Well, in other words, we're close to betraying that trust. There's no question about that. But yet, that's our responsibility, to be, the representative of divinity and the eye of God on this world. And from that point of view, a real environmentalism can flow. Whereas if we say something more like, well, the real proletariat is the non-human species, and we support them. The human beings are sort of bourgeois, and they believe in private property, so they have to be overthrown. But boy, when it gets to the birds and the beasts and the viruses, that's where where our allegiance should really be, because that's the true proletariat. There's a tendency to go in that direction, which is crazy and destructive, and so we have to watch out. I mean, the question of how to deal with environmentalism is very hard, because we are sort of in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, and we have to admit that. And that's hard to deal with if we think, well, we have to come up with the solution with the correct relationship to this so we can fix it. Well, we have to say to ourselves, without just giving up hope completely, we have to say, but what if we can't fix it? Or what if the real effort is to deal with the karmic consequences of a whole thousands of years of human activity now coming, now being harvested? We're going to have to deal with that, and how will the human race survive, and how will we go on? And whereas the idea of, we just, stop, stop the emissions and shrink our carbon footprint and all this, the whole thing will turn around again. It won't turn around again. It's moving in a particular direction. And this is where traditionalism and traditional eschatology and the reign of quantity and the signs of the times by Guénon are so helpful, because they say, okay, world ages come to ends. Every age comes to an end. Every planet comes to an end. We don't just say, well, therefore we give up and we only think of our own personal salvation, or if we don't believe in God, we only think of our own personal safety and self-indulgence and to hell with the world. We can't do that. That is corrupting to the human soul. But on the other hand, we have to tell it like it is. And we're at a point where this world age, this world system is now coming to an end, very obviously. And so what are the spiritual potentials of a condition like this? What is God's will for us at a time like this? And this is the kind of question we need to ask. And so it has nothing to do with saying to hell with the environment. Let's just, use it, any way we can, use up all the resources until it's totally exhausted. Nor can we say we have to consider the environment before the good of the human race because they're essentially opposed. Those don't work. That's why we're getting driven to metaphysics as a way of dealing with and understanding what we see all around us in the state of the world. So.
From what I understand from hearing from King Charles, in particular from King Charles' perspective, is they say that, you mentioned that, you need your gas stove. But from his point of view, they say that if we don't do something right now, there's going to be a cataclysm right now as we speak. And this is kind of the theme, that it has to be done right now. We don't have time to deliberate anymore. So whatever decision we make, it's better if we do it now than if we wait, because it will be worse if we wait.
Well, that is true. But how much of that decision can we make? Is the decision really still fully in our hands? There are decisions which are in our hands. We do what we can. But that's what I in one of my books, I said something like, I consider political action not to be utilitarian, but to be liturgical. We do something that is in line with God's will and in line with the essence of humanity and with a respect and care for the natural world and all of those values, and what do we do that enacts and demonstrates and manifests our the correct attitude toward all these things, whether or not we think it's going to work, because ultimately to prevent some cataclysm, because we're in the middle of a cataclysm. Let's face, we think, is the cataclysm going to happen? Wait a minute, let's say it started in 1914 or before that, or the Industrial Revolution, but it's been, we're in the middle of a mass extinction event. And you just see the momentum of it, and you see, well, this is going to work itself out willy-nilly. That's the way it is. So, so once we accept that, not in a spirit of despair, but in a spirit of placing our hopes, which we need to retain, in a higher dimension of things, in a deeper dimension of things, and if you will, in another world. How do we comport ourselves at this time of the cycle? And if we comport ourselves correctly according to what the human form really is, and according to God's will for us, then we will be doing the best we could possibly do for the environment or for the human race. But we have to make it liturgical. We have to say, let's, let us perform, let us walk in a sacred manner. If we walk in a sacred manner, the best possible outcomes, even if they're not enough as far as we would hope, that's the way the best possible outcome will develop. So
sure. It reminds me of Syed Hossein Nasr had an excellent statement where he said that the pollution of the natural environment is a sort of 11th hour externalization of the pollution within ourselves.
oh yes, no question, that's so clear.
So to take these sort of 11th hour purely external steps is not addressing the real problem at all. And
and it doesn't mean that if we suddenly, let's just to purify our soul instead of worrying about the vast garbage patch that's collected in the Pacific Ocean. Let's deal with that. I mean, there will be people whose call in life will be to figure out how to clean up that garbage patch. More power to them, but you can't simply say that, well, I mean, like psychologically, people say, well, if you're facing problems in your life, what you need to do is to see that the essence of those problems comes from your attitude. And then the pop psychologists or the pop esoteric psychologists will say, so just change your attitude and your circumstances will change. Well, in many cases, it's harder to change your attitude than your circumstances. That's not the easy way or the magic bullet, but still we have to put that first, because we're not going to be on this planet forever. Whatever happens to this planet, we're just passing through, and we have to form ourselves for eternity. Whatever happens to the planet. That was true in times when the environment was strong and when society was more intact. Still, the same choices before us. Are we going to let our corruption drag us, into the darkness, or are we going to form with God's help our souls so as to fit them to inhabit paradise? That's always the choice, and it's the choice now. Always, that never goes away. So.
To bring it back to the eschatological perspective, what's particularly worrisome to me is that when we see these catch terms like sustainable, particularly sustainable, from in all of King Charles materials, when you see sustainable, that they're talking about smart technology, and this is a favorite theme of the sort of conspiracy theorist side, is the smart technology is how they're going to control every aspect of your home via a centralized location, so they'll be able to turn your stove off, which will then be the electric stove off from the central location if you go over your quota, so to speak.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that would be a further descent into hell. There are other kinds of appropriate technology, which, as a hippie, one of our major influences was the Whole Earth catalog. You remember that?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was a very large book, with illustrations and articles, and it was extremely interesting. Stuart Brand was the conceiver of that, and this was basically, among other. I mean, it had elements of spiritual teaching, and it had lore of all different kinds, but the core of it was, here is appropriate technology for the people who want to be hippies moving to the country and living in communes. Here's how you compost. Here's how you heat your house without electricity. Here's how you do these different things. Mm-hmm. And this is all very interesting. I don't know how applicable it is now, how many people can really live like that. I can't live like that. I had a chance to go in that direction when I was younger, and I wasn't cut out for it. But now I'm 73, and I'm not going to suddenly move to a commune and start digging compost, pits. So but you know, there is appropriate technology, but the idea of a centrally controlled technology which will curtail everybody's use of energy and such, that's rather depressing.
Mhm. And this was what worried me so much about when I came into the perennialist scene, so to speak, is that I noticed that most of them seem to just blindly accept these solutions. You know, when King Charles proposes sustainable technology, they go, well, that's great because we need to save the environment, you know, and I'm like, well, you should have read Guénon, you know, and you know where this all has to go.
Yeah.
Right? And if the sustainable technology is bringing us to a centralized system, who's going to be at the top of that centralized system? I mean, the conclusion should be obvious for anyone who's read Guénon enough.
Yeah. Well, if King Charles is at the top of the system, and we hope he will be, then everything will be fine because he's on our side and he believes in God and all the religions. And then, yeah, I mean, Guénon said that in the latter days, at the brink of the hour, there may be something like a restoration of a something on the order of a sacred empire, like a Holy Roman Empire. Well, this is the restoration of the sacred empire. You can see that ideology in Julius Evola, you know. But he said this empire will not be a sacred empire. It could only be the regime of Antichrist, because we will then be in the era of the inverted hierarchy. You know, it looks like things are becoming vertical again. And we're once again looking at reality in a hierarchical way, according to traditional ontology and such. And this is good. Well, if you put the natural world, if you put, you know, the substantial pole or the material level of things higher than the level of essence, which is most perfectly expressed in terrestrial existence by the human form, if you do that, then you literally, specifically have an inverted hierarchy. It's hierarchical, it seems spiritual again, but it's the opposite of what spirituality has ever been.
Can I say
Oh,
something here?
my wife is very involved in all of this and would like to speak.
Please.
Okay,
Can you get to where you know?
okay.
Well,
I
you can put your hand in so people will know you're real. Okay.
I listen to King Smith because I like what he says about science a lot.
Yeah.
He's the best if you want to know the difference between science and scientism. However, he is a Catholic. He talks about, and he has these other people who believe this. I don't know if Jacques Morello believes this or not, but that the Catholic Church is about to be restored. And I think that's a very dangerous belief. I think the churches have gotten too far gone. I think if I see something that just seems like on a massive, that there might be real Catholics praying and doing what they do in small ways.
Yeah, and this is what my wife Jenny is doing. She is a traditional Catholic who goes to a small house church west of here. I'm in Lexington, Kentucky, and she became a traditional Catholic basically through the influence of Rama Kumaraswamy. So that's what they're doing, and those people are.
But can I say about this? I fear that if a big church, it seems to return to hierarchy and tradition, comes about, that's going to be a very dangerous thing, and I would be suspicious.
Yeah, and we can see that in the Russian Orthodox Church now.
Yes.
I mean, the Russian Orthodox Patriarch just said, you know, well, if a Russian dies in a war against the Ukraine, his soul will go to heaven. Right. Now, this is completely heretical when it comes to Orthodox. Yes. Orthodox Christianity. So what you know, there was this great and hopeful restoration of Orthodoxy after the fall of the Soviet Union. Churches were being built again. People were flocking, you know, to want to find their Orthodox roots. And then here we have this.
Yes,
you know,
it's terrible.
and of course, Kirill is ex-KGB. You know, he's a state hierarch. You know, under communism or under the present regime. Yeah. And so there you have inverted hierarchy. You know, the hierarch of the Russian Orthodox Church is promulgating, you know, a complete heresy, and no one knows it because the Orthodox particularly think, well, whatever the guy with, you know, with a great outfit and the hat, you know, says, you know, and who has the beard, you know, who is, you know, must be Orthodox. You know, whatever the present religious authorities say is Orthodox, well, that's what's always been taught by our long and venerable tradition. And they don't know that that's just wrong. At least the Catholic Church, since the Catholic Church had to face the Renaissance and the Reformation, you know, the Catholic Church has a centuries-old tradition of the critique of modernism. Finally, with the Second Vatican Council in the early 60s, it was taken over by modernism, without doubt. And as Rama Kumaraswamy, you know, makes that very clear in his book, The Destruction of the Christian Tradition. But at least that tradition of the critique of the modern world from the standpoint of the Catholic Church particularly is still available, and conservative Catholics, if not traditional Sedevacantist Catholics like my wife, have that to draw upon. Whereas the Eastern Orthodox do not have that kind of tradition because they didn't have a Renaissance and they didn't have a Reformation. And, you know, by the same token, Islam does not have as much of a critique of the modern world, which was something that was created and developed in the West. You know, it was just sprung upon them in a couple of very shocking moments, like Napoleon's, you know, conquest of Egypt, and then later, you know, later colonialism, and then suddenly there's an internet available where anybody can get all the pornography they want, you know, and this is something that the Sharia has not addressed in the past, right? So it's a true culture shock. You know, the Catholics, even though the church has gone, is essentially apostate, the larger church is apostate at this point, without question, because Pope Francis, I don't know how many people are aware of this, in a interview with Vatican Radio. Yeah. With Vatican Radio, that was on the Vatican website for years, he made the statement, he said, well, guess what? God does not exist. And then he said, oh, you're shocked that the Pope should say God does not exist? You know, why should you be shocked? You know, so God does not exist. That doesn't matter because we have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So, you know, so we're cool. You know, we've got, now what this is for the first time in my knowledge, a direct appeal or declaration of polytheism in under the guise of Catholic Orthodox, you know, the Catholic Church. These are, you know, degrading the persons of the Trinity to three pagan gods. This is how Islam has always misunderstood Christianity. Now, Islam is very right when it says there's a danger of taking the three persons of the Trinity as separate gods. You know, watch out for that. It warns very seriously against that, and says, and as Muslims, we're not Trinitarians. We don't do that. We concentrate on the unity of God, and that is that. There's no God but God. Whereas the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, accepted into his growing political entity traditional Christians, you know, who he knew were Trinitarians, you know, like the monks at St. Catherine's Monastery that he granted the first of his covenants to. He knew they were Trinitarians, but he called the Christians and the other peoples of the book within his polity that was developing, he called them the faithful. He called the Muslims the Muslims, but the term the faithful, these are my faithful, he applied this to Trinitarian Christians. So his attitude was, we know that they have a Trinitarian view. That's not what we're doing. We consider, you know, that there are dangers to this, and so we warn Muslims against this. And yet, you know, if God had wished, if Allah had wished, as it says in the Quran, he could have made us one nation. So let us, if we're going to wrangle over theology or over truth, let's do it in the best way we can without recriminations against each other. And let's realize that in the next world, Allah will enlighten us as to those points upon which we differ. Now, that's a beautiful attitude. It's, you think it's a little bit too close to what, the one world religion, or it's something that can be used by the globalists in pushing a one world religion, but it really wasn't that, because he was very clearly saying, Muslims, you do not accept that Jesus was literally God, and they do not accept that there is truly a Trinity. That it's important to say there are three persons. We are oriented toward the unity of God, and yet he said other people, who knows, that God is mentioned much in Christian churches, and the Christians are good people because they're monks and nuns among them. And so that was his attitude. It was nuanced, and it was a balancing act that could not in this world continue for very long in that form. But that was his will. That was his understanding. So we always have that as Muslims to go back to. So
I'm also glad that you raised the Russian Orthodox Church, because that was a point I wanted to touch on.
yeah.
If we read René Guénon's Spiritual Authority and Temporal Power, he makes it very clear that any system where the spiritual authority is subordinate to the temporal power is anti-traditional.
Yes.
So we have that. Obviously, we have it in the UK, right? But I don't think anybody imagines the Church of England. Maybe some British people might, but it's not really taken seriously as a
right.
To be restored.
The churches, what are their museums and venues for rock concerts, and God knows what's happening in the cathedrals now. You don't really have a viable church, as far as I'm concerned.
Whereas in Russia, there is an argument made, particularly from Westerners who are just kind of grasping for some tradition, that the Russian Orthodox Church will be the sort of revival, or it already is the revival of tradition.
Well, that was pretty much the line of Frithjof Schuon and James Cutzinger until he found that the Orthodox were not interested in his perennialist ideas, and so he converted to Byzantine Catholicism, because he was sort of off the it's still an Eastern Rite, but he was off the line with various.
So James Cutzinger converted to Byzantine Catholicism?
Yeah, he did.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes,
I'm actually a Byzantine Catholic. I'm an Eastern Catholic. I'm a Melkite Catholic.
huh.
Oh,
he was he Melkite?
I think that his church was
And so he he was free of the ideology pretty much of Vatican II, but he was also free of the heavy-handedness of the Eastern Orthodox patriarchs, and so had a little more space.
Yeah, I can't say that, since I was born and raised Roman Catholic, and I just kind of fortuitously found the Melkite Church in my old neighborhood in New York, and I did that. I was originally planning to convert to Orthodoxy, but in the process of that, I literally just kind of walked into the Melkite Church, and I was blown away by it. And it's a very ancient Middle Eastern church, Arabic church. But I can't say that I've necessarily found any sympathy for perennialism there.
Well, you can't expect that.
Right.
I mean, perennialism.
When I did,
got to be. Some people need to understand perennialism to keep their faith, because they've already understood that more than one religion is valid. More than one religion produces real saints. And how are you going to deal with that? There are other people who have never seen that and don't have to see that. And you don't preach perennialism to people who don't need it, but thank God perennialism is there for people who do need it. That's what I say.
I think Schuon stated that so beautifully when he said that it may sound offensive to an exoteric religious person, but when he said that exoteric Islam he was not interested in it, that he was interested in the metaphysics of it. And that was what kind of set the flame in his heart when he was exposed to the metaphysics of it. You know, he was like, just the prayer, just the regular laws, that didn't really interest him.
Yeah, you know, I'm of two minds about that, because that's certainly how I approached Islam. But, you know, I believe that, you know, that the exoteric Islam is equally part of the revelation. You can't say, you know, the esoteric is the revealed part of a religion or a part of Islam, but the exoteric is created by men. This is not true. Both were revealed by God. And so Sufism, to be valid, is going to have to exist in relationship to the Islam based upon the Sharia. Now, as Schuon said, you know, we're going to have to limit, you know, or abbreviate certain aspects of the Sharia for the West, because you really can't practice them in any integral way in the Western society. Maybe some people can, but, you know, that's been my approach, because at the very least, because of my own limitations. I'm saying, you know, I really can't, you know, follow the kind of Sharia that the entire society in a truly Muslim nation will support me in doing, because it's not there. So I do what I can, you know. But there needs to be an understanding that the Quran is the origin of both legal Islam, as Schuon would say, legalistic Islam, and of Sufi, you know, mystical Islam. And some of the same verses or ayat can be interpreted perfectly on either side of that. This says, you know, this is what you're to do in terms of behavior, and yet there's an esoteric exegesis or tafsir or tawil of that, which is perfectly applicable to the Sufi path, to Sufi psychology, to mystical states. You know, so I think, you know, Sufism has to exist, no matter how difficult this is sometimes nowadays, in relation to the rest of a revealed Islam, which includes the Sharia. That's what I say.
I really identified with when he said that. I personally, I didn't take that to mean that the exoteric was sort of something to just be scoffed at, because what I took it to mean is that God speaks to man in terms he can understand.
Yeah.
So for me, when I read Guénon and when I was exposed to perennialism, I said I had been born and raised Roman Catholic, and it was fine. It was nice. You know, I went away from church for quite a few years, but after reading Guénon, such a fire was lit in me to be religious. And I went into church and I was just like blazing to be religious, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and that's, you were one of those people who needs perennialism. Some people read Guénon and they lose their faith, you know? That's just the way it is. We have to admit that. Oh. But, you know, but certainly that was, and for me, Guénon and the other traditionalists, and Schuon in particular, were a way of my beginning to make sense of all of the different religious and spiritual influences that had been thrown at me promiscuously during a very few years during the counterculture, where all the gurus from Hinduism and from Buddhism and later the Sufi sheikhs were coming and teaching. You didn't have to go anywhere. I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area. You just wait and they'll come to you.
And that was the Hare Krishnas. That's how they got most of their original followers, was from the hippies and the Beat Generation.
Yeah, as a hippie, that's about all I knew about I knew that, like, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami had written some very interesting books, and, you know, and had a theology and a metaphysics, but I didn't know a lot about it, because the Hare Krishna people were people who yeah, my hippie memory of the Hare Krishnas was when I was hippieing around in British Columbia, in Vancouver. You know, the Hare Krishna people would have a, you know, they would provide a meal, a dinner for the people, you know, and you know, it was all considered to be prasad. It was, all the food was sacred food, and so I went in and I ate some of their, you know, their Hare Krishna food, and they put on a little skit, And the skit was there was someone who represented a rather grumpy, uptight jnana yogi, you know, the yoga of
Right. The Advaita, right.
they had him sitting here, and he was going, Om, Om, like it was really true. And then Sri Chaitanya, you know, the beautiful
The great Bhakti, right.
Bhaktic troubadour comes in, you know, and says, you know, give up your uptight, you know, struggle to find God through knowledge and open your heart to love. And of course, he prevailed, you know. Well, in other words, that was a very popular and very interesting and a lot of fun relationship to the Hare Krishnas. But that's all I knew about it, is they were that kind of people. You know, that was the popular manifestation. So.
Yeah, we don't even have that anymore, you know. Now we have Jordan Peterson. That's the extent of our spirituality now, is our pop, you know, which is sad, you know, as far as the really popular figures go, you know, although you do. So, you know, with respect to my generation, there has definitely been a revival of religion, and perennialism, although I don't see any real overlap between the religious people and the perennialists. On the contrary, I see a sort of butting of heads.
Yeah. Well, because one way, you know, that is probably going to appeal to more people, you know, to return to religion is to return to exclusivism, to return to saying this is the true religion. Many people cannot truly be serious about God unless they look at their religion as the true religion. That is the test of sincerity. And it's always going to be that way for some people. But there are people like you and me who have we already know too much. We've already seen that there's more to the religious world than a particular religion. And our struggle is to fully accept that perspective, that universalist perspective. And then at the same time, even after that, be entirely sincere and one-pointed in the pursuit of our own path, and not spend too much energy looking to the right and the left of, you know, how is this like Hinduism? How is this like Buddhism? No, we'll do that up to a point because we've gone through that. We've studied those other traditions. But when it gets to the nose to the grindstone, you know, I mean, 5 daily prayers and Zek, you know, that's the essence of it. So, and the various doctrines of the Sufis, and, you know, spiritual reading of the Quran that inform and support that central practice. That's where our spiritual attention needs to be, or my spiritual attention needs to go, because spiritual attention is not infinite. You know, it's a great resource, but we're only given so much of it. And if we apply it to everything that catches our fancy, even if we're seeing actual truth in all those different directions, we might find we've used it up before, you know, we've been able to make the true breakthrough, you know, which is going along one path, Sirat al-Mustaqim, you know, the straight path.
To bring it back to the eschatological viewpoint, so now that you mentioned the hippie generation and this sort of open-mindedness towards other traditions, I do notice that same beautiful kind of free-spiritedness and open-mindedness among the young people being attracted to perennialism today.
That's not surprising, because a lot of the people who were attracted to Schuon, and I don't think he quite realized this, you know, had gone through counterculture, you know, yes. And they came out into, and you know, Schuon didn't have the perspective where he could see what counterculture had been, besides seeing, well, that's a bunch of people who are essentially, you know, living a degenerate lifestyle and taking drugs, and, you know, but how much traditionalism was there incipiently in the hippie counterculture. People like Schuon did not have the perspective to see that very well. And of course, Guénon, when he was going to the quote counterculture of his time, it was less traditionalist. It was more, heterodox occultism, very dangerous stuff, which is plenty of that in the hippie counterculture as well. But there were traditional strands. I mean, Swami Muktananda came by, and he was the chela, the direct student of the great Hindu yogi Swami Nityananda, who's one of the great Hindu saints of modern times.
I just read his Yoga Sutra book. Yeah.
And and he the hippies, I was in the hippie line, and he was giving us all the Shakti, he's hitting us with a peacock feather, whap, and it kind of worked, and what a transmission, now that's a weird, that's a counsel of desperation, like saying the world, we see what's happening to the world. We're getting near the end of, the Kali Yuga. So let's cast the grace upon the waters, and it may have some very weird effects and very dangerous effects, but some people may see the light. There was that attitude. It was, was able to go to the Black Crown ceremony of the 16th Gyalwa Karmapa, which is not available anymore. The head of the Kargyupa lineage of Tibetan Buddhism that Milarepa was a part of. And, this was very powerful stuff, and there were a lot of traditional inputs to the counterculture. There was just no clear way of separating them in the minds of the hippies or whoever we were at that time from other very much more dangerous things,
The dark side of that beautiful free spiritedness that I have seen among the young perennialists is that they don't seem to be vigilant towards the same things that the exclusivist religionists are vigilant towards. So if I go to my church and I speak, I have friends at my Melkite church. I have a friend who's a very, very well-to-do doctor. He's the head of a hospital department. I have friends with dentists. And when I speak to these men about, eschatology, I can speak to them very straightforward, and they completely agree with me. And they say we have to be of the utmost vigilance with everything that's happening now, because the devil is in the world and he's looking. But when I move to the perennialist scene, I don't see that same vigilance. I don't see that same sort of level of alarm. Everything is kind of like a hippie type of, oh, everything's fine. Let's just keep talking about how all the religions are all this, going to the same. Let's just keep, waxing poetic about perennialism. There's not that urgency, and this is my sort of real worry about the two. The religionists. So at the end of the day, I almost feel more at home with the exclusivists, because I'm like, well, at least they see the urgency of the situation.
Well, didn't Guénon say that urgency?
Guénon did, but we're saying that Guénon's understanding of that we were at the 11th hour, and of course Martin Lings also wrote a book, The 11th Hour, which is an important book, but that understanding did not come through, at least to the Schuon world, very far.
No, it did.
Or I would say to Hussein Nasr. What would you say?
Well, he might have more of that than you would think.
Yeah.
He doesn't publicly talk about it, but I think of a few things he would say when I was going to Washington years ago.
Yeah. Jenny was initiated in the Mariamia Tariqa by Sayyid Hussein Nasr. She never met Schuon, but we lived in California. We used to go to Washington, D.C. area about once a year, to go to one majlis per year with Dr. Nasr. So.
Well, at one time, one of the majlises, they were I couldn't get what they were talking about, whether it was something astronomical or something, some event had happened, and one of the Fuqara asked him about it and said, could this mean anything? And he said, well, he wasn't sure. It might mean the birth of the Antichrist.
Okay.
So he was willing to look at things in those terms.
Yeah, and one of the times, with Jenny, that I met with Dr. Nasser in DC, he was talking, I was just sitting in after the Majlis, and he was talking to his group, because I didn't attend the Majlis because I wasn't initiated into that target. But so he was saying, just thinking out loud, we really need to be talking to the evangelicals. And I said, yeah, and that it doesn't seem that ever transpired. But that stuck in my mind, and that's one of the reasons I took the tack I did in the system of Antichrist. I said, well, I mean, the eschatology of the Eastern Orthodox and the evangelicals, at least they're serious. At least the evangelicals are serious about, the darkness that we all have to face. They may have a rather, simple-minded or superstitious attitude toward, I mean, eschatology is this simplistic scenario which will happen, first, as if the book of Revelations were a kind of movie, like the Left Behind series of books, in which first this happens, first the dragon, and then the beast, and the whore of Babylon, then the heavenly Jerusalem, and it all just, it's like a play, not seeing the symbolic resonance and depth of those different symbols and how they can be applied in many different ways. But still, they were serious about it. And so I said, well, I'm going to try to see if I can write something about Antichrist, because right now, most of the people writing about that are the evangelicals. I want to do something a little more, dimension to it than that. So, and over the years, I've heard things I wrote in that book coming out of the mouths of people that I'm sure would never acknowledge me as where they got it from, or maybe they didn't know it was me where they got it from because it went through several hands. But I just hope that what I've written about Antichrist could sort of up level the understanding of these things for even the evangelicals. Who knows? It was a hope anyway.
I know as a Christian, I've gained so much insight into Antichrist by looking at the Islamic tradition. Islam goes, I think, much more into detail on Dajjal and the mechanics of his entrance and his rise, and also his reign. So this is why I feel like there's a very crucial point between perennialism and exclusivism that needs people to kind of bring these views together, to tell the exclusive, for example, in my case, to tell the exclusive Christians, don't be afraid to look to Islam to, for warnings on the Antichrist.
Exactly. And just, one little symbolic point, one of the major signs of the Antichrist or characteristics of the Antichrist in Islamic eschatology, this is not from the Quran, but it's from a great deal of the Hadith, is that he will be one-eyed. He will be blind in one eye. And this is taken symbolically to mean, well, the two eyes are like knowledge of this world, knowledge of the next world, like the two eyes, the two things that you're trying to bring together, so we can have bifocal vision and depth vision, because there are two eyes, right? You can see this world, the world, and the other world. But for him, the eye that looks at the other world will be blinded, and so he will only be able to see this world. That's one of the things that means. But if you look at Eastern Orthodox iconography, the devil, who's usually a little black figure, much smaller than the Virgin Mary or Christ or whatever, a little black figure, he's always shown in profile. So in other words, effectively, he has only one eye. He's never face on. So you have similarities like that.
I just realized when you mentioned that, I hadn't heard that view before of the one eye towards the world and the one eye towards God. But if you know the traditional Christ Pantocrator from Sinai in Egypt, I have it on my mantle here. One eye, the two eyes are different to signify the divine and the worldly.
One eye is mild, right?
Yes. To signify man and God, right?
Of course, be looking toward this world, because it's just a rather severe world. So.
So I could go on much longer about this theme, but I don't want to keep you for too long. I'm sure we could continue on at a later date, but this crucial juncture between, you know, the perennialists who frankly need to wake up and understand where we are now.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then the exclusivists on the other hand, which, you know, at least they've got their souls, they're looking out for their souls at least, you know, whereas the perennialists, I feel like, are in serious jeopardy, a lot of them.
Yeah, but on the other hand, one could wake the perennialists up to the need to look at what's going on in the world and the eschatological dimension of things, because you know, we have the example of Guénon. We can say, hey, look, you know, let's look at this aspect of it. You could talk to them.
Yeah.
But as for the exclusivists, you know, make the perennialist view available, and if some of them need it, they will be attracted to it. But I don't think we can preach it or should preach it to them, because it's
absolutely, yeah. Like I said, at least with the exclusivists, they're looking out for their souls, you know, so they've got that covered. You know, they're not in jeopardy, in serious jeopardy of.
Yeah, I mean,
whereas the perennialists, you know, I can see a lot of them just, you know, skipping down the path, thinking, oh, here we're going to the perennialist traditionalist revival now, you know, we're not realizing where they're really going.
Yeah, and you know, one thing that is a cautionary tale is you have to look at what happened for Schuon's group and the scandals and all of that. And it's very hard to do that, because if you bring that up, those who still adhere to Schuon, you know, who are devoted to him, will think, well, you're one of the detractors. You're coming to damn, you know, our wonderful spiritual teacher, and I'm not. I'm just thinking, you know, what happened to his group is a picture of the kind of stresses and contradictions that exist in the spiritual life now. It's a fantastic picture. If you don't, you know, you just don't say, well, now, you know, I used to think Schuon was God, but now I know he's the devil. What shouldn't people? This is the way people think. People want something simple.
This is something.
To look at the contradictions in Schuon's between his doctrines and his practice, and between there's some contradictions within the doctrines themselves, and you say, you know, what is this? What does this mean? This is a koan. It's not, oh, now I see that, you know, there are errors in him, which means throw them all out and become an exclusivist, which a lot of people did. You know, people on the rebound from the Schuon group would become maximalist Eastern Orthodox Christians, and just, you know, we'll just fast harder and pray more and believe in this, you know, and if that was right for them, more power to them. But, you know, for the perennialists don't realize what a hot seat they're sitting on. You know, it isn't so easy. You can't, well, the truths have been seen and known, and they've been offered to us for free without our really having to do much. How wonderful. Well,
and now we have a perennialist king, right? So they got everything now.
Yes, and maybe he'll start giving grants, or you know, we'll have little, you know, we can be kind of delegates for him to the benighted exclusivists of the world. God knows what people think, you know?
And they're missing the whole point of the religions that they're supposed to be focused on, is that you're going to go through hardship. If you like, I love the hadith of Islam that says to hold on to the religion in the end times will be like holding on to two hot coals.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So I think that sums up the situation so perfectly. But yet you see the opposite view from many perennialists, where they think, well, things are getting better now. You know, we're winning, you know.
Oh my goodness.
Better.
Goodness.
Well, and you know, you have to ignore an awful lot. I mean, God is merciful and just. God is beautiful and majestic. I mean, this is fundamental kindergarten level of understanding spirituality. You know, God, it says in the Hadith Qudsi, Allah says, "My mercy has precedence over my wrath," but it doesn't negate his wrath.
Yes.
If his mercy has precedence over his wrath, it means that his wrath is in service to his mercy. So it's necessary and it's part of the mercy, but it's still wrath, and it's still as rigorous, more rigorous than one can imagine. And in the times we're in, we need a doctrine of rigor, or at one point we'll lose our faith. We'll think everything is okay. I'm looking at the bright side, la, la, la. And then finally, you know, the world itself will just make it impossible to look at things like that. And then you say, I was wrong all along. Maybe there's no God. You know, it's dangerous to do that. You know, we have to have a fundamental, an element of fundamental piety is the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. You don't just go to wisdom and say, well, wait, I got wisdom. I don't need the fear. You got to start and go through every one of those steps. And then your wisdom will be solid and will be established because no fear will be able to disturb it.
You know, and we know from the Hadiths and from Revelation that we're going to be presented with increasingly difficult decisions.
Yeah.
Where you're going to be forced to make a decision, where you can't just stand above it and be like, well, you know, everything's, I'll just do what the system tells. This is why I loved your videos from over a decade now, Alex Jones Learn Metaphysics, because you're bringing it together. You know, I mean, Alex Jones, yeah, he is kind of a comical figure. I mean, I think everybody can agree.
Yeah.
But what he's saying is sorely needed with the perennialists. They need to wake up and understand that we already have been faced with decisions where the system has been already making ultimatums to us for the past 2 years, right?
Yeah, yeah. And you know, if Charles is able to put a happy face upon, you know, what's being done to us by the globalists, that will be a terrible thing.
Yes.
And it will essentially destroy perennialism.
Yes, I fear perennialism may be trying to join the world at this point.
Well, yeah, there's there was almost that, you know, there's one, let's see, it was one other thing I found in what I wrote here. Just a little item, but once I was looking at it was in British television. I'm not sure it was BBC, but it was some British television. And this is what happened. You know, there used to be that series Inspector Lewis. And what was the series that came from, Jenny?
Inspector Morse.
Inspector.
He died, John.
Yeah, Inspector Morse. You know, his sidekick was Lewis, and then you had a later series on Inspector Lewis. And let's see. A chink in the perennialist armor appeared in a 2010 episode of the BBC, or maybe it was just some other British channel, detective mystery, Inspector Lewis, The Allegory of Love. A young detective, during an interview with a Muslim professor at Oxford, remarks that the professor has a volume in his bookshelf by Titus Burckhardt, and goes ahead to briefly explain. And Lewis, who's sort of a Yahoo, you know, he's not into all this intellectual stuff, you know, whereas his young sidekick was an ex-seminary student who had sort of left Christianity, because, you know, but in other words, he had the mind of a scholastic philosopher up to a point, and he says, oh well, and so Lewis says, well, who's this Burckhardt bloke, you know, and so his sidekick says, he says, oh, I see you've got a book by Titus Burckhardt, which was in the Muslim professor's bookshelf, and he goes ahead briefly to explain the primordial tradition without reference to any of the revealed faiths. Then a brief, nearly subliminal image is shown of the traditionalist diagram used by Schuon's followers of a series of concentric circles with radii. No explanation is given. You know, that you know, similar to Schuon's monogram of the feathered sun. So it just, here's the traditionalist diagram, but they don't even say what it is. In other words, it was used as a suggestion, as a possibly subliminal suggestion.
Yeah, this is getting into something that maybe we can do another video on it. As a matter of fact, there seems to have been at least an intellectual interest in perennialism going back quite a while with the British elite. which I just began reading the biography of Sri Ramakrishna, and who wrote the foreword, a beautiful, eloquent, moving forward, but Aldous Huxley.
Yeah.
And so that there is this kind of strange presence of perennialism within the British elite, who are, you know, also the sort of theme of all these conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
Lord Northburn.
Lord
you know about
Northburn.
him? Yeah, he wrote about ecology.
Yeah,
and
environmentalism. Yeah, he was,
environmentalism.
you know, he's the one with the title besides Charles. And yeah, I mean, and of course, this goes back to Orientalism and, you know, the colonial administration, the British Raj in India, and yeah, that's an interesting history to look at, you know, and certainly Ramakrishna was in many ways a predecessor to the traditionalists. I mean, why did he have to realize God through the various religions? If he could realize God through one religion, wasn't that enough?
Mhm.
What's this other stuff? Well, there was perhaps a reason for it, but it was dangerous. You know, what Ramakrishna did was dangerous. It's understandable because he worshiped God as Kali, and Kali represents the substantial pole, or in a certain sense, the reign of quantity, as divine, which is an eschatological sign, because when the reign of quantity, when the absolute appears as indistinguishable from the relative, not as hierarchically exalted above the relative, that's the end of the world.
Right, Kali
That's
holding the severed head with the severed arms around her. Right.
Yeah, and so
I
that's,
tell you, I worry with Biden and his showing his dementia. We might end up with President Harris, and that would be that she's Kali-like. That would be a terrible sign. A terrible sign.
yeah, yeah,
Sorry.
right. You know, worse than Hillary Clinton.
Yeah,
Hard
well,
to,
I mean, we know that everything has meaning, so we can't dismiss any of these symbols.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 So, but so anyway, how do we conclude this? In my book, and I need to sell books because I need to make money. So here's my book. See, where can I see it? Oh, there it is. Yeah. It's called The Way Forward for Perennialism After the Antinomianism of Frithjof Schuon. Because Schuon went sort of outside of Sharia in one way or another. And maybe there was a reason to do that. And I'm not saying he was a sinner, and I'm not saying that there wasn't a reason in the greater divine economy for that manifestation. But yet, we have to say it took place. And, you know, it's part of the enigma of Schuon and the contradictions of the times. But what I'm saying in this book is, instead, in terms of perennialism, of looking for a meta doctrine that homogenizes the different religions, because, well, the perennialists have always said, well, we're not trying to do that. We're not doing syncretism. We're, you know, we're just seeing the truth in the different religions, and we want them to maintain their particularity and their distinctness because they're all divine revelations. You know, all right, that's good. You can say that, but the pressure, even no matter how many times you say that, the pressure towards syncretism is vast.
Absolutely.
And I back in the 90s, I wrote a letter to Schuon because he did a interview in a Theosophical Society publication, The Quest, in this country. And I said, well, what's he doing with the Theosophists? And so I took that as an opportunity to say, and is there not a tendency to syncretism here? Or some of the things he said in that interview suggested that. And I got a letter back from Bloomington, Indiana. It was not signed by Schuon. It was typed. You know, apparently it looked like he dedicated this to a secretary, and he answered, or my question was answered, and the person, presumably Schuon, said, well, we are doing syncretism of a kind, but not the syncretism of the Theosophical Society. Well, I think he got pushed up to a point in the direction of syncretism because he was not consulting the legitimate authorities of Islam, who might have said, you know, Sufism is true, but, you know, thus far and no further. He didn't have anyone cautioning him. And he had all the pressure of his students, a lot of whom had come from the hippie counterculture, bringing all those tendencies. And so something, you know, not quite kosher may have happened at one point. So, so what I'm saying is, instead of trying to come up with you know, let's look at the points of similarity between the religions. Well, you do that, and you're going to abstract the points of similarity from those religions and make a plenary or quintessential esoterism that Schuon talked about, which is going to be forced, whether you like it or not, in the direction of almost becoming a new religion. It's hard not, you know, to bow to that pressure, even though it has been declared all along that's not what Schuon is doing. He didn't bring a new revelation, but there's a pressure in that direction. So if you want to avoid that pressure, how about the religions looking not at each other anymore, saying, let's get along, where, you know, well, I as a Muslim will not emphasize the uncreated nature of the Quran, because that will offend the Christians, and I as a Christian will not emphasize the divinity of Christ, because that will offend the Muslims. Let's just talk about what we have in common. Well, in other words, every religion is getting drained and jeopardized and deconstructed ultimately by that tendency.
Yeah.
And the thing is that so much of the interfaith movement, where that tendency of, you know, we need to get along with each other. The problem is that the religions are fighting among themselves, but we need to overcome that and become friends. So much of that tendency is being sponsored by the globalists, by people who may not even believe in God, by you know, foundations and think tanks and governments who are coming up with grants to the interfaith world, you know, to bring religious peace. But all the religions are putting themselves under a non-religious authority. This is no good, you know. And at the same time, those same forces who are doing that with the interfaith movement, we can find it from time to time, will sponsor groups like ISIS. You know, outside of Britain and America, in the Near East, you don't have interfaith. What you have is the same people, in some cases, you know, supporting terrorist organizations. You know, one of the purposes of this kind of support being to turn the religions against each other, so that we'll destroy each other. So the religions are destroying each other, you know, in war in one part of the world, and they're coming to a wishy-washy kind of meaningless friendship in another part of the world. And this is a two-pronged attack to destroy religion and for the globalists to gain total power over, you know, the world of religious belief. And let's not go there. Let's turn around and if the religions want to get together, let them ask, who are our common enemies? What is being done to us by the same people? You know, I mean, and the globalists want the religions only to think about the relationship to each other.
Yeah.
If there's a problem, it's a problem of conflict between one religion and another.
You know, if I can add,
supposed to turn toward the globalists and say, yes, but what are you guys doing? You seem to be helping us, but are you really? Let's look at your agenda. That is not being done. So people need to consider what the agenda of their common enemies might be, and how to stand together against that agenda. That's something that can make perennialism really useful in another way. Yeah, you know. So
looks like we're about to bump up against the time limit here, so I want to just.
Well, that was it. That's my ding. That's my
conclusion. That's I feel like we could just keep extrapolating on this for so long, because especially the last 2 years, exactly what you just said. I think in the last 2 years, I particularly in New York, because when I rode the whole thing out in New York, and I watched how the religious Jews behaved, and I gained an entirely new appreciation for them, because Judaism was the tradition I was least familiar with. Yeah, and when I saw how they bound together, you know, in the face, and you know, together with Christians and Muslims, and you know, when their synagogues were closed and everything.
Yeah, that's a very helpful development. You know, really.
Excellent. You know, I'm so glad that you joined me and your lovely wife also. So excellent conversation. I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you very much. And hopefully we can speak again.
Okay, well, yeah, anytime.
Thank you very much, Charles. Okay, take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
God bless you.
God bless.